And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Wet'suwet'en people. The executive branch of the BC government is headed by the Executive Council, which is made up by the Premier and members of the Legislative Assembly. The Executive Council is commonly referred to as the Cabinet. The Cabinet sets priority issues for the government and approves policies set by the ministries. On today's Open Connection, Minister Nathan Cullen.
A ministry is newly created, only about 9 or 10 months old, but it was put together for a very specific purpose, and that is to reconcile issues around the land and the water here in British Columbia, specifically engaging communities and industry, First Nations around land use planning, maritime planning, because if you look to some of the conflicts that we've had or missed opportunities we've had as a province to do better when it comes to especially natural resource development or conservation, that whole field of work, you can often trace it back to government's unwillingness or inability to work with the people who live here, bring in everyone's values and hopes and aspirations for the place, and then make some plans out of it that we can agree on the big principles. So my work is a lot of reconciliation work, a lot of speaking to the natural resource sector, and very much we have committed to protecting 30% of British Columbia terrestrial by 2030. And how you do that involves those very same actors. So I'm drinking from a fire hose, as they say. It's a lot to learn, but I love it. And it feels like a real connection to some of the stuff that you and I used to talk about when I was working federally or when I was a small business owner. So I'm thrilled. It's an amazing bit of work.
It's kind of interesting because it's usually the other way around where you have to go federal to make these big changes, but it seems like you're making more inroads, on the local level and letting people who live and know the area, say, hey, we need to make this something that future generations can enjoy.
I was just on a call this morning with the federal fisheries minister, and it was another opportunity where, and we're meeting with First Nations leadership in the Northwest, where we can, rather than just kind of complain about how things are, because there's a lot to complain about and worry about when it comes to the fishery, our conversation was, what's hopeful and what can we do together? Canada, BC, First Nations, to start to restore our fishery to abundance, to start to, frankly, take more control at a very local and regional level. It's always been my bias. I always thought that we can make better decisions here, the people who live here, than, civil servants living in some far off land. And that was the exact conversation we're having this morning. So real shifts in organizations that I didn't think could shift, because I just seen them stay pretty static for years. But yeah, it's all about raising the voice of the Northwest, making sure people in Victoria and Ottawa, around the world, frankly, understand our values and what we want to see in the world and how we're going to do it together. So it's all very problem-solving, forward-looking, kind of the way I prefer to be in the world.
And I need to apologize because it's like I'd never asked, what is the official name of this?
Oh yes, that's very important. I can't believe you didn't ask. I'm really hurt. The ministry is called the Ministry for Water, Land, and Natural Resource Stewardship, and the very last word in that name, really important, and it came out of some consultations with First Nations leaders around the province that said, if you're going to talk about natural resources, you're going to talk about land, you're going to talk about water, your orientation has to be that we are stewards, that we got to pass it on better than we found it. And we've not been able to say that, as you know, Robert, for a long time. And so it doesn't matter really who I'm talking to. I'm constantly thinking about that stewardship role that I have, that I think we collectively share.
Here in British Columbia, people are dying from overdose. because toxic drugs are circulating in our province. If you use drugs or know someone who does, know how to make it safer. Learn more at stopoverdosebc.ca.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Stewardship is responsible use, including conservation, of natural resources in a way that takes full and balanced account of the interests of society, future generations, and other species, as well as private needs, and accepts significant answerability to society. Let us return the conversation with Nathan Cullen. And do you believe that that last word, stewardship, kind of really sets the table on what you're looking to accomplish or what's trying to be 100%. Accomplished in the group setting?
We have for too long, I would say, in British Columbia in Canada, had the wrong relationship with the natural world, certainly with respect to First Nations. And so when we talk about reconciliation and we talk about big issues like climate change, sustainability, all that kind of stuff, and or making the economy work better for people, right, so that we can afford the life that we want and need for our kids. It's often about the land, ultimately, from my perspective. And we're seeing some pretty big shifts in this province, shifts that some people didn't think were possible. We signed a recent agreement in the Northeast up in Treaty 8 with Blueberry River First Nation and the other Treaty 8 nations. And it's a deal, it's an agreement that I wouldn't have thought was possible 5 years ago to help heal the land back, much greater influence and power for Treaty 8 nations in terms of what's happening, and a whole piece around economic certainty for those who are looking to do business in the Northeast. And some of the elders were just like beside themselves, overcome, because they've been fighting for so many years to be heard and concerned about how much impact was happening in their lands, their ability to hunt and fish and just live. And this is not done, but it's this whole new pathway. Rather than fighting First Nations in court, we said we were going to negotiate, and we did. And to see that and be a part of that in some small way is just makes getting up and going to work really easy. Let's put it that way.
And I guess you could say really that the BC NDP is embracing that concept of reconciliation, because it sounds like that's exactly what this agreement was a reconciliation on, hey, we're here together. What can we do to be better stewards?
I think I've heard this from a lot of First Nations folks and from others, that they get skeptical when people use the word. It gets used a lot, reconciliation. And to me, it's always been a relatively straightforward, if difficult process, because you just break it down and you say, well, what is it? It's to reconcile. Reconcile what? These two worldviews that crashed into each other, that the colonialism that went on, the stealing of land and all that. And well, okay, so that's a big thing to reconcile. And it ultimately, to my mind, it's about the government, the province, the federal government, sometimes municipalities, willingness to share, to rebalance power, how we make decisions, how we manage the land. You're seeing more and more like guardian programs being stood up, where the people who are going to steward the land are the nations in whose territory it's happening. And that's just so much better. We still have so much to do. We still have a lot of things that exist in the province that were built under the old regime. But to me, it's relationship. You start there. You have an agreement on what your values are and what you want to see in the world. And then you build up to things like, how do you permit a mine? How do you properly build a road? How do you share revenue? Like all that stuff comes, but you can't just go around just trying to throw money at problems or just coerce or force people into deals that they suspect aren't very good for themselves or their people. And yeah, it's someone said to me when I worked in Africa, they said, if you want to go quick, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you walk together. And it's an expression that I try to think of when it's the heavy early work on the relationship, especially a relationship that's been broken. and there's a lot of trust missing. But if we want to go far, and we need to, then you got to do it. You got to walk together.
One of the things that is just outside of your hometown in Smithers was a little town of what I knew as Morristown, and then they kind of stood up and said, "Hey, we really don't want that name. We want to go back to where we were," and they renamed it. But I guess you also have been there's some exciting news regarding some residential units that are going to be built there. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they've actually now opened and people have moved in, and I had the number earlier, 24 or 36 units, built in partnership with the Wet'suwet'en Nation, with the province. And you'd know this. I was always frustrated with this, that when you got onto so-called reserve territory, it was only federal, and the backlog and the wait lists and the quality of housing and all that stuff has just been a national shame as far as I'm concerned. And under Premier Horgan's leadership, we said, well, the need is the need. We have a strong obligation as a province to build more housing for people, particularly vulnerable people, folks in low income. And so we've been building, quote, on reserve. We're building daycares on reserve. And to us, it doesn't matter. It's the same taxpayer. It's the same people in need. Sitting back and just saying, well, that's Ottawa's problem, when Ottawa hasn't really changed the funding program for housing on reserve in, 40 years, 35 years. It's insane. So yeah, it's great to see those units going up. The daycares are getting built, and we've got a ton more to do because the need is so great. There's a massive backlog just about everywhere in the north.
Overdose deaths in BC are now the leading cause of death among young people. Most of these deaths could have been prevented with just a few simple steps. We can all be a part of the solution.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. In a 2022 year-end interview, Premier David Eby stated, "Investing in people has paid good returns for our province. A surplus implies that the government has extra funds which can be used for many different purposes, including making purchases, paying off debts, or saving for future generations." Let us return the conversation with Nathan Cullen. The BC government is mentioning something that we hardly ever hear when it comes to politics, and that is a budget surplus. Is that right?
Yeah. It's look, BC, we owe that because of the people obviously in this province and the businesses. We were the first to recover from the pandemic in terms of the main shutdowns. BC recovered the strongest. You see the help wanted signs just about everywhere, from slinging coffee to early childhood educators to engineers and on down the list. If you're looking for work, it's available. And that has also meant that the Treasury has done well. Question is, what do you do with it, right? And we know from all what the economists tell us is this year that we're in right now is likely to slow down. We're seeing the early signs that interest rates, cost of living is really hard on people, and so people are pulling back a bit. And so we anticipate that is true for BC. We hope it's mild and a shallow recession, but this is a time when government clearly needs to invest. This is not a time when you pull away from people, because the needs are going to be real and they're not going anywhere in 2023 as far as we can tell.
And do you feel that the government is in the right position where they can actually do that, where they can say, hey, I know you need money right now, but if we do this, we'll reap the benefits manyfold down the road?
Yeah, there are places where we know when we spend as a government, as a public, like things like childcare would be a good example, where I met with some young mums here in Smithers, 6 or 7 weeks ago. There were about 7 or 8 mums with young babies, and 3 nurses, 2 teachers, a lawyer, and they want to get back to work at some point soon, but there's no childcare spaces. I think as a government, we should have publicly affordable, quality childcare, and that's what we're doing. We signed a deal with Ottawa to do it. We've been building more childcare spaces than our province's history. But if you're solely interested in just on the economic question, it's a no-brainer, right? For every $1 we invest in childcare, you get 7 back into the economy. because there's work happening, but you're also freeing up somebody else who can come back and be that nurse working in long-term care. And so our challenge right now is workers again. We could probably open another, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 spaces if we had more childcare workers. So we're making some changes, which I think is really cool, Robert, where we've changed the rules around people who want to be an early childhood educator, that they can begin their work while they're still in high school and start to get that first year of practicum and learning going. And by the time they graduate high school, they're kind of almost done their early childhood education. They don't have to go away for 2 or 3 years. That kind of stuff we've been doing around the province. And I think it's just better. We're doing it in the trades. We're doing it right across the school system because people want to live and learn at home or in their communities. And it's hard to take 3, 4, 5 years off work, to upgrade. So we're changing the way that's all happening. And I think it's working better for people and getting more workers for businesses who need them.
And also, what do you think is kind of unique? I guess you took some family time away, but you kind of did it in a public way where you kind of say, okay, you went out and I guess did some public skating and over there in Smithers and
Yeah.
Hazelton. Was it? Did you put on the goalie pads or anything like that? Or?
Oh my gosh, no! But it was trying to stay out of those little those plastic push things that the kids are supposed to be learning how to skate. There are some very speedy dudes in Hazelton and Smithers. So mostly I was trying to avoid injury was my number one goal. I want to do more of that stuff, actually. I think just very simple, affordable or free opportunities for families just to come out. And there's no politic in it. It's just, you're just being out in community. And we know there's a lot of stresses from COVID for people. Folks got isolated. Some people, weren't as active as they want to be, all the mental stresses. And so sometimes the simple things, the community gatherings, the concerts, the festivals, just being around people, again, matters. And so, yeah, I love doing that stuff because it just gives people that chance to do it and it doesn't cost them anything. And I'll serve them hot coffee and try not to end up in hospital.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The BC government recently announced a new permitting strategy for housing that will streamline the process and create a single, coordinated approach to housing-related permits and authorization. In this final segment of Open Connection, Minister Cullen shares how this can ease the current housing crisis. We need workers here throughout BC, but let's be honest, if they don't have a place to stay, we're going to run into difficulties. What is the NDP doing to kind of help that?
Well, let's put it in context first. Like last year, we had more people come from away, from other provinces, other countries to BC than we have since the 60s. The year before that broke the record as well. Like just a lot of people interested in coming to BC. Couple that with a housing crisis. I don't know if you thought this, but when I remember the pandemic started, if someone had said housing prices are going to go up in BC through a global pandemic at a faster rate than they were before, I would have said that's crazy, but they did. We stood up an $8 billion fund for housing, affordable housing, co-op housing, marketplace housing. In some previous work I was doing, we gave municipalities way more power to accelerate permits because sometimes these permits take 3, 4, 5 years to get from the municipality and the province. That's not a way to build housing. So we've been really aggressive on that front. And last year we built more housing, more rental housing, more market and social housing than we ever have in BC's history. And it's still not enough, right? And we have the chicken and egg where we don't have enough workers to build the houses to house the workers that we need in the hospitals and schools and businesses around the province. But we're catching up. It's just a massive, massive undertaking. And it's been really good for the economy, but it's also put a lot of people under stress because it also affects, as you know, affordability, right? When there's just not a lot of places to rent or own, scarcity means the prices are going to go up. And the cost of living has been really, really hard on people. Food prices, energy prices, like right across the board. We've been doing a lot of things to help with cost of living, and I think they have helped, but it's still a lot of strain on families.
And is that some of the feedback you've been getting with doing these community meetings with members?
Yeah, it's people saying that just walking down the grocery store aisle feels like it's just these prices are out of control. My kid wants to get into college. There's not enough seats. You can hear a lot about sort of the scarcity of things. We also have people coming up and saying, you built 20 new, 40 new daycare spaces in Terrace. It's helped change my family's life because it's $10 a day. And now we can afford it where we couldn't before. That stuff's exciting. One not surprised, but it's been good is from the natural resource sector. Forestry's going through a really hard time right now, as you know, the number of mill closures, which has been predicted for 20 years. We're running out of available wood, and that's really tough. And workers are also getting job opportunities before they leave the plant gate. Mining is going crazy, and it's only going to get better. We had our best exploration year, I believe, in BC's history last year, and our second best gold and copper year ever. So you're hearing a lot about it. And, worry about the planet, pretty consistent. What are we doing? Can we get some more EV chargers? Can we get some more help for renovating your home or getting a heat pump in? People are doing a lot, and we're stepping up. It's exciting. I love seeing things go out the door that are going to help. Yeah, big and small.
And what do you think is, what's next on the agenda? What are some of those back burner things now that you can bring forward to say, hey, can you kind of look at this, or can you kind of look at that?
Yeah, I want to work with the community I live in here in Smithers. We're due a hospital. I can't wait to walk into the new Terrace Hospital when it opens. That's a north of $600 million hospital that we're building. We got to do some work in fixing Highway 37. Like, there's a lot of Northwest things that are really preoccupying me. Helping workers that are out of work from the mills, from forestry, is a big deal for us right now. And then on the ministry side, just some really exciting stuff, a lot around conservation and climate change, and just putting BC up in front of the world, which we're doing this weekend in Vancouver. There's 4,000 or 5,000 people coming from around the world talking about marine conservation. And as you know, the coast and the marine environment's always been a real concern of mine. We're going to do something that's not been done anywhere on the planet in terms of that work and that effort. So that's kind of cool. And we're doing just about everything. The whole relationship around First Nations and the voices that they have with respect to decisions that go on it's still changing, but in many cases pointing in the right direction.
And anything I might have missed that you'd like to add?
Nice to be home for a little bit, but now I'm fully on the road. I just, I'm almost to the point where probably once or twice a week, depending on how much I'm moving, I wake up and take a couple minutes to figure out where exactly I am. Which sounds weird, but after, you do 8 days, 8 different towns, it's great because I'm getting out and seeing things, and seeing is believing. It's also a bit disturbing sometimes when you're getting the cab and you have to take a second to think, okay, where am I going? Where are we headed next? But it's fun. I love the life, and I love the energy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.